As we gather together, may we learn to recognize and affirm the pieces of possibility, the bits of good that we bring. May we encourage rather than control, love rather than possess, enable rather than envy, allowing our individual gifts to weave a patchwork of peace. The soft, deep blue of sensitivity and understanding, the red energy of creativity, the white heat of convictions, the risky, fragile green of new growth, the golden flashes of gratitude, the warm rose of love. Each of us is indispensable. If we are to minister to a broken and wounded world, together in our gathered diversity, we form the whole that we need. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. I'm Bill, today's worship associate. As you may have noticed, we are not in my most sacred of spaces, my kitchen, because it's a mess right now. The coffee maker's packed up and everything is covered in sawdust while I finish all my trim work back here. Hopefully by Veterans Day, when I get to do this again, it will be nice and pretty and done and not covered in sawdust. And of course, to make things worse this morning, Costco was out of Diet Coke last weekend, so I am stuck with Diet Pepsi. Truly a tragedy of epic proportions. But moving on. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on ways to welcome and care for one another better. Whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring for the land properly. Please take a moment now to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You may get a candle and a way to light it so you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Now, let us kindle our candles or the inner flames of our heart with these words. We light our chalice today in honor of the community that we can be for one another, a community bonded by love and care, a community that hopes and challenges, a community that holds us through all the stages of our lives. We light our chalice as a reminder that we can be this community. I invite you now to share in the comments where you are by writing, I carry the flame in whatever town or city you're joining us from. And now, please join in singing our opening song, number 351, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. The words will be on your screen.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be our joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be our joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be our joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be our joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be our joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Please join me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend Catherine Boyle. My pronouns are she, hers, hers. I'm the Director of Family Ministry here at UUCB, and this is the Time for All Ages. This is a story that Jesus told a very long time ago. Some of his followers used to go to Jesus to learn from him, were very apt to be particular about the kinds of people they were kind to. The story told them what Jesus taught about the way they acted without him saying it outright in just so many words. Once there was a merchant who lived in Jerusalem. The merchant had his goods strapped to his donkey's back, and off he went to leave the city. At the gate, the merchant stopped to speak to the guard. He told him he was off to Jericho. The guard asked, "Aren't you afraid to go alone? The road to Jericho is dangerous. Robbers hide in the bushes along the cliffs. I am told these robbers have lately been very rough with travelers. Ride faster for when you come to those bends in the road." The merchant thanked the guard and said he had been on the road many, many times before and had always been safe. Off he went. The air was crisp and fresh. In the field along the road, flowers bloomed. As the merchant rode on, the air began to grow warmer. The sun rising higher in the sky shone brighter and hotter as he traveled further along the road. The mountainsides were hard and dry and covered in rocks. The road was steep and wound around the edge of cliffs. He remembered the warning of the guards and urged the donkey on. Suddenly, without any warning, robbers sprang from behind a boulder. Almost before the merchant knew what was happening to him, they pounced upon him, pulled him off his donkey, and threw him to the ground. They pulled his money bag from his belt, took his water bottle from his slide, stripped him of most of his clothes, and then they hit him on the back of his head and back with sticks until he bled, and until the poor man was too injured to feel pain any longer. They dragged him to the side of the road and left him as if he were dead. Then they took off with his donkey and his goods. How long he lay under the sun, he never knew. When the merchant finally awoke, his head was aching and his whole body was so sore and tired he could not move. His throat felt dry. He panted for breath. He had never in his life wanted to have just so much as one little sip of cool water. He listened for the sounds of footsteps along the road. Oh, he thought, if only some traveler would come along and help. But it was very quiet, and he waited, half asleep, until click, click, clickety, click. The sick man opened his eyes. He tried to look down the road, but he could not raise his head. The sound grew louder. Click, click, clickety, click. At last, at the bend in the road, he saw a man on a donkey riding up the road towards him. The man was richly dressed. "Oh, I hope he's a good man," thought the Jewish merchant. He raised one of his hands. "Water, water," he called faintly. The man halted his donkey, and he looked over on the side of the road. "Oh, dear," he muttered. "Oh, dear. Robbers have been here, and I must hurry along too, or else I'll be robbed." And so he struck his donkey with his stick and rode off. The pair of hooves grew fainter until they died away entirely. Until later, click, click, clickety click. It was dim at first, but slowly it grew louder. He began to feel hopeful again. This time the merchant would call louder. Surely this traveler would stop and help him. Click, click, clickety click. Closer they came, and the sick man noticed some trumpet hanging from the donkey's side. "He's a good man," thought the merchant. "He's a musician who plays in the temple. Surely he will stop and help me." "Water, water," he called as loud as he could. The traveler stopped to dismount his donkey and then ceased. "That man is almost dead. If I were to help him, he would die on my hands, and then what would I do? And besides, I must be in Jerusalem before sunset." Click, clickety, click, click, click. Off went the donkey's hooves away from him, and the merchant once more fell asleep from weakness. When a third traveler came by, the sick man was too weak to hear the sound of the donkey's trot. He lay there as if he were dead. He did not know when kind arms lifted his head and poured a little cool water between his parched lips. Perhaps it was just as well as he did not hear the traveler talking to himself. "Shall I help him or not?" the traveler muttered as he stood looking at the helpless man. "He is a Jew, and I am a despised foreigner, a Samaritan. If he were well and I were helpless in his place, would he help me? Jews won't even speak to my people. How many times have they been cruel to me, called me an animal. How many times have they snapped the word Samaritan at me as if it were poison? But this man is dying. I am going to do for him what I wish he would do for me if I am ever as helpless as he." So the Samaritan took water from his own water bottle and bathed the man's wounded arms. He took oil from another bottle and poured it tenderly on the bleeding parts. Then he tore strips from his own clothes and placed them around the wounds. At last the Jewish merchant opened his eyes. He looked up at the kind face smiling down at him. Soon he was sitting slumped over on the back of the stranger's donkey, and his new-found friend was walking beside him, holding him up to keep him from falling as they went down the steep and winding road to an inn. There the Samaritan took care of him until he was healed. The two strangers were now friends. And this is the story Jesus told his followers.
We now enter the time in our service that we make for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and our concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, and the cares, the concerns, and the challenges that we may each be facing as we go through this and every day. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any of your joys or sorrows or significant milestones that you've had recently in the comments section. I invite us all to hold these in the compassionate embrace of this loving community. Please join now in the spirit of meditation with these words by Sufi poet Rumi. You've perhaps seen or heard of goats going down to the river, the lame and dreamy goat bringing up the rear. They're worried. There are worried faces about that one. But now they're laughing because look, as they return, that goat is leading. There are many different kinds of knowing. The lame goat's kind is a branch that traces back to the roots of presence. Learn from that goat and lead the herd home.
Find the stillness, hold the stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. See the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
So most of you have likely noticed that I seem to always have headphones on, or at least with me when I'm at church. I am an Audible junkie. I started using Audible back in 2017 for school, and I was quickly hooked. In the past 5 years, I have spent over a year of that on Audible. Kind of scary, kind of interesting. I listen to about 300 books a year, mostly sci-fi adventure type stuff. Every 10th book or so, I feel guilty and I listen to something educational. Which last one was a cultural history of food. Actually, really, really good. And I've been listening long enough that playback at 3x speed just kind of sounds normal to me. Anything slower than that just feels like I'm listening through molasses. So I can churn through books pretty fast. Just a side note, Andrea and I have an understanding. Sometimes you're in critical plot development in a book and don't want to be disturbed unless there's an emergency, and that's okay. So we have perfected some phrases over the years. I love you very much. Now go away. Space battle. Leave me alone. Critical plot development. Don't talk to me. This works. We understand this, and this is something that definitely goes both ways. But going back to the topic of heroes. So today's topic, heroes, came up. The concept of the superhero immediately came to the forefront of my mind. But in my experience, the hero is only as good as the villain. With the expansion of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and TV shows, we have been inundated with traditional superhero stories. But the genre is evolving. Some of my favorite books and movies and shows are the ones that take the superhero genre and flip it on its head, where the hero is the villain, or the villain is a hero, or the villain is a villain's villain. Yeah, that works. And who you find yourself rooting for. Or they have non-traditional plots, as the protagonist is entering the world of corporate superheroes as the new office assistant. office drama for superheroes, right? Or all the heroes die and they're weak sidekicks like Allergy Woman and the guy who controls butterflies but has the confidence of Batman have to save the day. There's a series on Netflix. It's interesting. It may not be for everyone, but it's called The Boys, where the normal people whose lives have been ruined as collateral damage of the uncaring, narcissistic, and sociopathic superheroes work together to exploit their weaknesses in order to kill them because they do more harm than good. And in one of my favorite series by Drew Hayes called Superpowers, there are three classes of people. Supers, who can control their powers and society. Normal folks, and then Powereds, who are a group who are a danger to themselves and society because they cannot control their powers. The book follows a group of Powereds who have entered into the hero certification program at their college after undergoing a secret test procedure to make them supers, giving them control. Of course, when the super society at large realizes that superpowereds are stronger than them, things get a little more complicated. I don't want to give too much away, but I highly recommend this series, Superpowered by Drew Hayes. Another series that I like, the villain runs an evil consulting agency, which helps other villains defeat the heroes by exploiting every rule and trope of the genre. The opening line of the book is, the third rule of villainy. Heroes are arrogant, predictable, and really, really dumb. In this series, the villain's power is reality. So when a group of heroes try to destroy them, he just stands there, imparts reality, and lets them destroy themselves with their own powers. The super speeders' legs shatter, the shrinkers suffocate under their own density, the growers don't have the mass to support their bodies and they go pop, fire users unfortunately immolate, and most importantly, archers run out of arrows. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for the long-form adventure, overcoming obstacles, loss, and personal growth, and beating the big baddie at the end of the journey. But sometimes changing things up is pretty awesome too. And like the superhero genre, we should not be afraid to change things up as well. I guess the moral of the story, the hero is only as good as the villain. Unless, of course, the hero is the villain all along. Happy Sunday.
I volunteer as tribute. If the wind hasn't changed, then I'll preach on Sunday. No, I will not get up from this seat. There is a moment when someone steps into the stream of forces through which they become a hero. One might call it their decisive moment, the deciding moment that transforms them from being just a part of the crowd into being a significant contributor to the forces of change. Before Katniss Everdeen volunteered to be a tribute in the Hunger Games, popular series of books and movies, she was just a member of District 12, dissatisfied with the reign of the Capitol and the Games, but with a priority on survival and hunting for the food her family needed. But the moment she volunteered to take her sister's place, she became a contender in the Games and ultimately a force in the growing rebellion. Venturing from his ship that had run aground on its way to America from England, Universalist John Murray was trying to make a new life. He had left his preaching behind in England forever, he thought, and certainly didn't expect to be taking it up again. But when chance brought him to the pulpit in Thomas Potter's church, he took his place in Universalist history in America. And when Rosa Parks was arrested for keeping her seat on the bus, she became one of the two people whose names kids are the most frequently taught about the civil rights movement here in the United States. Heroes. Many stories have them, and they are an archetype with many sub-archetypes. They're usually the main character in the story, the center of the action, players who not only influence the end outcome, but who are amongst the most crucial agents in the story. Now, it may be against some adversity or force of evil that they are acting, or else they're engaging on a grand quest, or perhaps both. One of the subtypes of heroes that I'm particularly fond of is the accidental hero. An accidental hero is someone who just happens to get swept up into the action and adventure. Often they struggle with some reluctance or even protest being able to be that kind of leader. I find I can relate to accidental heroes a little bit more. They don't have superpowers or destined births. More, they're just average people who happen to be at the right place at the right time to make a difference and therefore get dragged into the action. That's just what happens to Katniss in the Hunger Games trilogy. In this dystopian series, dystopia being the opposite of a utopia, so a future where everything's gone wrong. In this dystopian series, the struggle depicted is the seemingly all-powerful capital up against the districts that provide its resources. Districts whose people are controlled by fear, induced by shows of force, and primarily by the annual tournament called the Hunger Games. For the games, each district loses 2 children to the competition, and only one of the 24 emerges alive. Katniss was not a player before her year in the games, only a competent hunter and gatherer who focused on feeding her family and caring for her sister and her best friend. But when her sister was chosen by chance for the games, Katniss volunteered to take her place. This was, supposedly, the moment when she stepped into the forces forming around her. But as she enters the games, the forces begin to propel her into this accidental hero role. So here's what happens after her young ally in the games is killed. Here's the words that are in her head. Gale, her best friend, Gale's voice is in my head. His ravings against the Capitol are no longer pointless, no longer to be ignored. Rue's death has forced me to confront my own fray against the cruelty, the injustice they inflict upon us. But here, even more strongly than at home, I feel my impotence. There's no way to take revenge on the Capitol, is there? Then I remember another competitor's words on the roof. Only I keep wishing I could think of a way to show the Capitol they don't own me, that I'm more than just a piece in their games. And she goes on, for the first time, I understand what that means. I want to do something right here, right now, to shame them, to make them accountable, to show the Capitol whatever they do or force us to do is part of every tribute they can't own. I'm more than a piece in their games. A few steps into the woods grows a bank of wildflowers. Perhaps they're weeds, but they have blossoms in beautiful shades of violet and yellow and white. I gather up an armful and come back to Rue's side. Slowly, one step at a time, I decorate her body in flowers. At the close of the games, Katniss subverts the rules by threatening to deprive the Capitol of having a victor, another arm of their control. She reflected, all I was doing was trying to keep us alive. Any act of rebellion was purely coincidental. But when the Capitol decrees only one tribute can live and you have the audacity to challenge it, I guess that's a rebellion in and of itself. Through her reflexive actions, she becomes the accidental hero and ultimately the mascot of the growing rebellion as it develops through the series. Another accidental hero, this one is in our own Universalist history, is John Murray. Perhaps you've heard the classic story. Here's how the story usually goes. Murray had been a Universalist preacher in England, but had left in search of a new calling besides preaching. He had lost his family, had lost everything, and really needed a change in his life. But then his ship was stranded during a storm off the coast of New Jersey. Some of the stories even say that the name of the place it was stranded was called Good Luck Point. So anyways, Murray came ashore in search of assistance and met Thomas Potter. Now, Potter had dreamt of a church with the Universalist message and had built a church just waiting for the right man to arrive. The whole field of dreams, if you build it, they will come sort of thing. So as the story goes, Murray and Potter found one another. Potter asked Murray to preach. Murray declined. The reluctance that goes with accidental heroes, remember? Potter insisted, and Murray finally said, if the ship is still stuck on Sunday, I'll preach. Of course, the ship remained stuck. He preached. And on that day, here's what Murray said. Visitors poured into the house. Potter took each by the hand. This is the happiest day of my life, he said. There, neighbors, there is the minister God promised to send me. How do you like God's minister? I, continues John Murray, I ran from the company, prostrating myself before the throne of grace, besought my God to take me and do with me whatever that God pleased. I said, I am, O Lord God, in thine hand, as clay in the hand of the potter. Immediately upon my return to the company in the house, the boatman entered my house and said, the winds have changed, we shall depart. And then, of course, Murray remains with Potter and the ship leaves, the reluctant accidental hero, who then begins to spread the Universalist message in the region and ultimately becomes known as the father of Universalism in America. And no doubt, you know the last seemingly accidental hero I want to mention today, Rosa Parks and her part in the Montgomery bus boycott. In the, not classic, but the surface story, the sanitized version, Parks is an accidental hero. She's portrayed as a seamstress who was just on her way home from work, just another day, and was too tired to vacate her seat for a white passenger on the segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Parks was arrested for her act, and because of outrage about her arrest, the next morning, African Americans all over town began to boycott the buses, ultimately leading to the end of segregated buses in Montgomery. But of course, this is not the entire story about this seemingly accidental heroes, or frankly, the others. My belief is that accidental heroes are actually not necessarily quite so accidental, and they may not be accidental at all. When we take a closer look, there is a lot more going on both within and around the hero. Rosa Parks was not just a seamstress. That was her day job. She was also a trained activist and secretary of her local NAACP chapter. She had already been put off of buses multiple times for not surrendering her seat. She did not act out of stubbornness or exhaustion, but rather out of a long-term calculated effort and clear resolve. And going beyond the often told surface story, the one taught in the relatively sanitized versions of our history, we can find not only Parks's convictions, but also the entire community of which she was a part. It was not an accident that she acted. And the response of the African American community was not reactive, but rather proactively organized resistance that had been carefully planned and was waiting for the right person who could withstand the scrutiny and pressure to be the public face of the boycott. She was actually their second start. Another woman had been arrested not too long in the past, and they had thought of making her that public face, but turned out to not be the right person. But because of her leadership in the community, Parks was chosen to be just that. There was also a community and a context surrounding the story of John Murray. First of all, Thomas Potter already knew about Universalism. He'd already been exposed to Universalism thought here in America. It's not that Murray brought it with him. Potter was friends with a community of German Dunkers. These were Anabaptists who shared a theology of universal salvation with him. Potter built his own church because he could, and then he put out tons of advertisements for a preacher. He wasn't just sitting around and waiting for someone to come. He was proactive. And as the story goes in my mind, When Murray showed up wearing a preaching suit, which, okay, if I'm going to go knocking in that time, if I were going to go knocking around on folks' doors in a rural area at night looking for help, and I had a preaching robe, preaching suit in my suitcase, I'd probably throw it on too. So as the story goes, when Murray shows up in a preaching suit, I bet any person in town or even neighboring towns would have been so well aware of Potter's project, would have just told Murray, oh yeah, go that way, Potter's waiting for you. What? He thinks, who is this guy? What do you mean? And goes to the next door. No, Potter's house is down that way. What are you talking about? Makes his way to Potter's house, and Potter says, oh good, you're here. What am I here for? Well, to preach, of course. Not so accidental. And Katniss, in the Hunger Games, was groomed and prepared for her role as mascot of the rebellion. In the book, not the movie, sorry, but in the book, her pin was carefully chosen by the mayor's daughter as a reminder of successes from the previous rebellion. And as the rebellion grew across the districts, Katniss and her association with Mockingjays were turned into symbols of hope. Her accidental role as hero meant stepping into that role, but it was created by others. Mockingjay clothes had already been designed long before she ever officially agreed to be the face of the rebellion. And while it's only stated in like one line in the book, I also believe Katniss was already groomed for it by her father before his death in the mines. I fully believe he was a resistance leader himself. None of these accidental heroes, though, none of them would have become heroes without the communities that created them. Those with whom Thomas Potter had already connected and learned universal theology that motivated him to employ Murray as a preacher. The African-American community in Montgomery that had already organized the bus boycott and was poised to act. These communities are the heroes. They may not make it into the popularized stories, but they are heroes just as much as the person in the face of the story is. Then there are also moments when heroism can arise from within a community. There were the spontaneous heroes present in the UU Church in Knoxville in 2008, when a man opened fire in the congregation. George McKendry, who was killed when he threw himself into the line of fire, and the other members of the congregation who subdued the shooter. In this tragic event, they were heroes. But I also believe it was their UU community and experiences and values that helped them to give them the courage to be able to act in that moment. It was because of practicing these values over time that they acted when the moment was there. The community makes the hero, and the communities are the heroes. And even though the stories may be of a single face, many are part of making the history and creating the change that happens. Let us make and let us be those communities. I challenge us to nurture one another and ourselves, and keep nurturing one another and ourselves so that we are ready to step into that moment when it comes. May it be so.
As we commit together to making this a loving community, we must take time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half our offering is shared with a good neighbor organization who needs our financial support, and we hope that you will continue to practice generosity with them during these difficult times. This month, our good neighbor is Diablo Valley College START program. The DVC START program is a foster youth success initiative support program designed to increase access, retention, and graduation rates for current or former foster youth at DVC. Their goal is to provide a warm and welcoming environment, create a support network, and empower foster youth students to make progress towards self-sufficiency, professional success, and community leadership. Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as the offertory begins. Thank you.
I wanna cry, I wanna feel the world around me whirling by. I wanna cry for those that live and those that die. You sing a lullaby. I wanna cry. I wanna pray that all my wishes could come true after today. And should I put a word in for you, should I say an extra Kyrie? I wanna pray. I wanna lie. I wanna think that things are better than they are. I wanna think we've gotten further, and that far is just an inch away. I wanna lie. A horse with wings. I wanna think of things like that and other things. I want two brothers, one who laughs and one who sings. I hope the future brings a horse with wings. I wanna know the things they told me way back then were really so. I wanna make a little mark before I go, not barely just goodbye. I wanna fly.
Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It's been good being together today, even virtually. Before we shift to our coffee hour on Zoom, may I remind you to check out all the things that are available in our congregation, even during the pandemic, by exploring our website, uucb.org. There, you can find a link to news in the week ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which includes a list of activities, announcements, and contact information. As we prepare to leave the worship service, here are a few things to note. On August 22nd, after church, both the People of Color Caucus and the whites opposing white supremacy groups will be meeting. Please see the week ahead for more details. And on August 22nd, the Personal Theology Lecture by Dr. Megan Kirschbaum will be about parents and grandparents with disability. Dr. Kirschbaum is the founder and executive director of Through the Looking Glass, to develop model services for infants, children, and parents with disabilities and their families. And most importantly, on September 14th, this year, the California gubernatorial recall election will be taking place. Your ballot should begin arriving this week if you are registered to vote. If you are unsure of your voter registration status or would like to register to vote, please go to voterstatus.sos.ca.gov. I don't care how you vote. I care that you vote. Because as my grandmother liked to say, you don't vote, you can't complain. Now, please join me in singing our closing song, number 66, When the Summer Sun is Shining. The words will be on your screen.
When the summer sun is shining over golden land and sea, and the flowers in the hedgerow welcome butterfly and bee, and my open heart is glowing, full of warmth for everyone, and I feel an inner beauty which reflects the summer sun. When the summer clouds of thunder bring the long-awaited rain, and the thirsty soil is moistened, and the grass is green again, then I long for summer sunshine, but I know that clouds and tears are a part of life's refreshment, like the rainbow's hopes and fears. In the cool of summer evening, when the dancing insects play, and in garden, street, and meadow linger echoes of the day, and my heart is full of yearning, hopes and memories of the whole of my being, reaching inwards to the corners of my soul.
We come together to be reminded of the community that we can be for one another. A community bounded by love and care, a community that hopes and challenges, a community that provokes us to step into possibilities for change as they arrive. It's not just that we can be this community, we must be this community. May it be so in the work we do together and the work we do as we go about in our lives. Blessed be.